Hi everyone, and welcome to Lesson 6b, where we continue our discussion of dehumanization and the process of othering as part of the etiology of genocide. In this lesson, we're going to apply these theoretical insights to two case studies. First, the Cambodian genocide, and second, the Armenian genocide. Reading 4 is yet another selection from Alex Hinton's book, wherein he introduces the idea of manufacturing difference as a concept that further elaborates the identification process in genocide. Reading 5 comes from the Dutch social scientist Anthony Holslag, who continues many of the same themes we've been discussing all week, while also directing attention to the crucial question of how the symbolic violence of dehumanization that goes on at the level of the social imaginary relate to the actual physical processes of genocide and annihilation. In Reading 4, Hinton provides a more refined model of the identity genocide process. It begins with the crystallization of difference. In certain situations, the dichotomous boundary between the in-group and the out-group hardens or crystallizes into an increasingly absolute binary, us versus them. So for example, he talks about a Khmer Rouge radio broadcast from 1978 called Who Are We?, which attempts to manufacture difference by crystallizing the clear line between us and the enemy. Indeed, there's a mimetic quality here, as the idealized self-image of the in-group is fashioned as an inverse reflection of the out-group. Yet the boundary between the in-group and out-group are not always so clear, especially in a case like Cambodia, where most of the victims were from the same national, ethnic, racial, and religious group as the perpetrators. Genocidal regimes struggle to police these boundaries, inserting a fundamental condition of uncertainty and anxiety into the murderous process. Thus, genocidal regimes struggle to mark or inscribe such differences in order to solve this problem, organizing institutional systems of domination and destruction that enforce the hardening of boundaries. Such institutions work to inscribe such markers of difference on the very bodies of the victims. So he talks about how Jewish victims of the Holocaust were subject to such terrible conditions in the ghettos and concentration camps that they actually began to resemble the stereotypical labels provided by Nazi anti-Semitic propaganda. Similarly, he analyzes Tuol Sleng, the infamous Khmer Rouge prison, as a liminal space where innocent victims were transformed into guilty subjects. Thus, we have another model of how dehumanization works to socialize the perpetrators of genocide. Reading 5 picks up where Hinton left off. A key part of the author's argument here concerns what Hinton called the mimetics of difference. According to the author, whose name is Holslag, there's an intrinsic connection between selfing and othering, as the image of the self is solidified through a purification process whereby the other is dispelled. Holslag draws from social identity theory, but he pushes back against the notion that genocide is somehow caused by a breakdown of otherwise normal identity processes. Rather, he argues more along the lines of Moshman and Shepard Hughes, even using the latter's phrase, the genocidal continuum, in order to describe how genocide emerges out of the same day-to-day identification processes that we're familiar with. Holslag also uses the concept of identity entrepreneurs to identify key intellectual agents who help crystallize differences. For example, he highlights the role of Ziya Gökalp, a Turkish sociologist, poet, and political activist of the Young Turk movement who was massively influential in shaping the modern Turkish national identity. This identity was rooted in the geopolitical context of imperial decline, as the late Ottoman Empire was besieged by foreign adversaries, both abroad and at home. Holslag thus points to how such identity entrepreneurs often emerge in moments of crisis, great anxiety. Indeed, he offers the counterintuitive proposition that these perpetrator groups are tied together not necessarily by a sense of superiority, but rather inferiority. This is actually a key theme of the entire class, and it's something that we'll come back to in Week 8, when we examine how perpetrators often see themselves as victims, acting in self-preservation. We actually saw that logic back in Lesson 6a, where we considered the possible ethical justifications for genocide, means of self-defense. So these are all very instructive insights, But your learning objective here comes right at the beginning of the essay, where Holslag cites a distinction Hinton makes between the crystallization of difference into essentialized identity categories and the actual physical annihilation of others. So we've noted that dichotomization and dehumanization are necessary factors, but by themselves they're insufficient. There's a gulf between the idea of othering and the act of genocide, between symbolic violence and physical violence. So this begs the question, how does the social imaginary of dichotomization and dehumanization turn into physical acts of genocide? Okay, and that's it for Lesson 6b. As usual, use these learning objectives to inform your discussion forum responses. Also, please note, once again, that I've extended the deadline for the dissertation project Part 2. Contact me if you have any questions. Anyways, thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.